Good afternoon. I would like first to thank the Chinese authorities and to thank His Excellency Mr. Wang Kunming, Head of the Publicity Department of the CPC Central Committee, and His Excellency Mr. Ma Chao-tu, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, for inviting me to this forum. I remember with great pleasure attending this forum in 2019 before COVID broke out to the world and changed our ways of talking and our way of communication. I remember that attending that forum was so inspiring, and that I came out feeling that the dialogue was so interactive, was so fruitful, and was with so much added value. And I hope that China will be very active in convening such forums and in inviting people from all over the world to discuss such important international issues. Today, I would like to speak about multilateralism and global human rights governance because I'm from an age where we lived in a multilateral system, but it was called the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 90s, we lived in one polar world. And this world proved to be very hegemonous and proved to be harsh on other countries and on other peoples, because the one polar system established itself as the real judge of countries, of people, of democracies or non-democracies. And although today the reality of the world is that there is a multilateral system on the ground. China is a rising great power, Russia is a rising power, Iran is a rising power, India is a rising power, and there are many organizations like Shanghai, like the BRICS, who express international opinion and international feelings. Yet the Western world, or the United States in particular, is trying to cling to a one-polar system and is trying to make all countries believe that we are still living in one polar system and that this one polar system is going to continue, and that's it. Perhaps this is the reason why President Biden called for a conference on democracy on the 9th and 10th of December. To this conference, countries were picked and chosen. And of course, the judge who is a democratic country and who is not a democratic country is the United States, is the West. The problem with this is that Western countries believe that only liberal democracy is a democracy. There is a phrase in the United States in the shops that say one size fits all. But as human beings, we know that one size does not fit all, because each country produces a political system, a social system, a cultural system that reflects its civilization, that reflects its culture, that reflects its history, and therefore liberal Western democracy cannot be the only democracy in the world. There are many countries in the world who have their own democracies based on their own history, based on the needs of their own people, responding to the needs of their own people. But of course, these democracies are not acknowledged by the West as democracy. Quite the contrary, they are accused of being anti-democratic. For example, Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega has just won a landslide victory in his elections, while the United States, of course, does not acknowledge Nicaragua as a democracy, although 74% of the people voted for Daniel Ortega. For people like us living in the Middle East, in countries that we suffer from the intervention of Western powers in our countries for decades, we know that what the West mean by democracy, again I say as far as we are concerned, is that the West means satellite states, a state that follows Western orders, that does what the West asks them to do, and that have no say in any affair, including their internal affairs. So this is what they mean by democracy, and that's why the list of countries they chose to be democratic are not necessarily the best democratic countries in the world. And the list of countries who were not invited could be the most democratic countries in the world. That's why the need today is for an alternative way of conducting international affairs. Of course, after the Second World War, the United Nations was established in order to establish basic rules for international relations and for relations among all countries of the world. But the problem is that, and particularly after the invasion of Iraq, after the American invasion of Iraq in 2003, the United States has been resorting to unilateral coercive measures against any country that doesn't fit their agenda. My country, Syria, is subject to unilateral coercive measures which were not condoned by the United Nations, and yet the United States imposes these measures not only on Syria but on any country who is going to deal with Syria or to trade with Syria or to receive Syrians. In this sense, the United States has established for itself an international order, and in fact lately they've been speaking about rules-based order, and no one knows what this rules-based order means. Is this a substitute for international order? Is this a substitute for the United Nations? What do they mean by rules-based order? Who wrote down these rules? Who acknowledged these rules? Who approved these rules? That is the problem. That is where we are today. So I believe that after feeling that military power is not enough to keep hegemony over the world, particularly after the US had to withdraw from Afghanistan and after it has become very costly for the United States to keep all its bases and to keep occupying countries, now they are trying to invent a more political or a more cultural tool in order to keep hegemony over countries. One of these tools, I feel, is this conference that is supposed to be about democracy, but it's really about Western club. Even if there are non-Western countries that are invited, but mostly it is a Western club that hails liberal democracy, does not acknowledge or admit any other democracy in the world. And this is really unsustainable because the world has so many different cultures, different histories. Countries have their own ways of governance, which of course should be consistent with international kind of order that applies to all countries, big and small, but who are equal in dignity and in integrity. But this is something that has to be discussed, acknowledged, established by all countries all over the world. And I could see that China probably is the one candidate who is entitled to lead this effort. we are in need of a multilateral system. The world actually is living a multilateral system, but the Western powers are trying to prevent this multilateral system from being rooted in our lives, and this has to happen, really. And I also like to say that what China and Russia are saying and doing about different cultures, about differences, about non-interference in internal affairs, about equal integrity for people, is exactly what all people all over the world want. I'm sure this is the way forward. This is the future that we are going to live, or at least our children are going to live. And I hope we will see it emerging, regardless of all the efforts that are trying to obstruct this emergence or to delay its birth. Thank you very much.